Hi, Dr. Kapil sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
Sir, we can start with your permission, Dr. Kapil sir. 8 o'clock. Yeah. So, very good evening to all the faculties. On behalf of Cadila, it's my pleasure to welcome all the faculties and all the delegates who have joined us for this session. Myself, Dr. Pratik Patel. I am looking after medical services for critical care and pain management on behalf of Kerala. So today, as the name of the topic is sepsis beyond antibiotics, the role of immunomodulation. In collaboration with IFCCM regional meetings, we have been doing these educational activities. So thank you for giving us this opportunity, sir. It's my really a pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dr. Kapil Boravke, sir. Sir is currently Director Critical Care and Department of Medicine, Vishwaraj Hospital and Research Center. He's Associate Consultant Critical Care Medicine, Prayag Hospital, Pune. And sir has been the National Executive ICCM since 2018, ICCM Pune Branch Secretary since 2016, faculty at Sri Lanka and Maldives National Conference, has been a faculty at National Conference, that's ICCM, and has been active member of organizing committee based of Brussels since 2016. Sir is faculty at Maharashtra State Conference since 2017 and faculty at API local and state chapter. Apart from this, he is involved in various social activities for public awareness regarding organ donation. And there are more than 10 publications in various journals of national and international repute. And sir has also written chapters in the book. So with this brief introduction, I will request Dr. Kapil Boravke sir to take the session ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Cadila, for taking an initiative for a very important topic currently, even in this COVID era where everybody is talking about COVID. I think sepsis is very important topic, and I think in working in ICU, what is the most challenging thing is to control or to treat sepsis for any patients pre-COVID or COVID or post-COVID. And as been probably revised definition of sepsis where it is associated with the dysregulated host response, we have to think about sepsis management beyond antibiotics. That's what whole idea of having such a kind of symposium or lecture and followed by panel discussion. So first of all, I thank big thank to Dr. Rahul Pandit sir. Throughout his busy schedule, still he has accepted our invitation only for one purpose, that he always believed for a dissemination of knowledge, and he's a hardcore teacher. He always wants everybody to learn about various aspects of intensive care medicine, and that is his passion, to teach and to educate more and more intensivists like us. So I really thank Rahul Pandit sir for accepting our invitation for such an important talk today. The flow of events today will be we'll be having first lecture by Rahul Pandit sir, followed by panel discussion, and I welcome all the panelists. I'll formally introduce all the panelists later. Let me first introduce our speaker. We are very privileged to have Pandit sir. Everybody is aware what kind of work he has done over last 18 months, I think without a single day's break. And he's very important member of National Task Force and a very important member to guide us through how to treat COVID, how to treat post-COVID. Presently, he is a director of intensive care at Fortis Hospital, Mulund. He is visiting consultant at Australia also. He has gone through various posts of ISSCM like chairman ISSCM Mumbai branch, and he is also treasurer of ISSA Mumbai branch, and he has very actively involved in Silver Jubilee Intensive Care Medicine ISCCM National Conference at Mumbai. He had several publications, 3 book chapters, and more than 120 lectures and scientific presentations. As I said, his special interest is in critical care, echocardiography, ultrasound, brain trauma, organ donation, and at present also he's actively working in the field of COVID, and he is a member of state task force also. So first I will hand over to Dr. Rahul Pandit sir for his views about what is immunomodulation and what its role in sepsis, and whether it works and what will be the future of immunomodulation in sepsis. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Kapil, for this very kind introduction. And I am really privileged to be here today with you all. I think what we need to sort of, just hold on. I'm going to, yeah. Okay. So over the next 20 minutes or so, I would like to just talk about immunomodulatory therapy in sepsis, which can be sort of titled around and said that sepsis beyond treatment of sepsis beyond antibiotics. We all know that this is from Derek Angus in 2000, Critical Care Medicine 2001, that severe sepsis and the US population, the US population is steadily sort of increasing, the sepsis cases are going to go up very, very rapidly. And we are going to have a significant amount of patients who would sort of be, victims of sepsis. And I'm saying victims of sepsis because it is unforgiving. It is sort of, been defined now for the third time. And that sort of tells us that how much interest is there in sepsis, because it forms around 30% of all the admissions in the intensive care unit. And the prevalence of severe sepsis in our country is approximately 28%. And we all know that a newer definition, which sort of changed the whole way, it sort of talked about a dysregulated response, host response to an infection. And I think that's very important to understand that there's a whole variety of things which are happening with sepsis. It's just not one particular organ which is getting affected. Many times we have a complete variety of cytokines which release. There's a counter-inflammatory response, there's a pro-inflammatory response which happens, and that leads to a severe amount of cascading effect onto the multiple organs of the body, leading often to multi-organ dysfunction. And some of the common infections in India are associated with the gram-negative bacteria. We are not a country where a lot of gram-positive infections come in, especially through the community and as well as through the hospital-acquired infections. A significant amount of them are actually gram-negative, and that seems to be our biggest problem. Some of these terminologies have now changed with the COVID-19. Now we are looking at sepsis as a cytokine storm. So if you see the presentation of sepsis, maybe fever, shock, respiratory failure, you have these pro-inflammatory markers which are released, and IL-6 stands out there, and TNF-alpha. They all tend to increase in sepsis. And there seems to be some encouraging results in animal models that if you block these pro-inflammatory markers, maybe you may have a different outcomes. The toll-like receptors play a major pattern recognition, especially of the innate immunity of the person. And that may be the reason why we have a traditional view of the pathophysiology of sepsis, where we have these virulent organisms, which then cause the pro-inflammatory markers and cytokines to go up. And if you have a young adult who is previously healthy, they may rapidly go into an onset of septic shock, which sort of fits into our animal model studies. And then there's a counter anti-inflammatory response, which happens as well, which sort of has the T cell and the regulatory T cell responses, which then lead to a lymphopenia, sometimes a lymphocyte dysfunction, along with monocytes simulated by the PAMP failing to adequately increase the cytokine levels in the body. And this then leads to impaired neutrophil phagocytosis, which then probably causes further cascading effect on the whole sepsis as a problem. And that's when this whole concept that maybe there is an immunosuppressive process which is going on, and we quite often see that the counts actually sometimes fall down before they go up. And that may be because of the hyperactivation of the innate immune response system, which then leads to pro-inflammatory cytokine production. They seem to vary with patient's age, comorbidities. Of course, the organism which causes that, which causes the virulence, makes a big difference. And then there are some other factors, such as the medicines or the problem with which the patient is admitted, which then relates to the response of the immunosuppression, which may be happening. And then a realistic view now, which we could say, is that this adaptive immunity and the innate immunity may have two different ways, and the sepsis-induced immunosuppression actually is more worse. And you may see that in those patients who get this, the larger population actually have a very, very poor outcome, as opposed to a very good adaptive response. If that's what they actually get after the onset of sepsis. Obviously, the patients who are elderly, patients who are diabetic with renal failure, with pneumonia, they tend to have a worse outcome than their other ones. Now, let's just corner this and come to the different cytokines which are there seen in the storm in the various diseases. So if you look at this on the left-hand column, you have this different types of problems which we are encouraging, which we are encountering, specifically the viral infections. You have the macrophage activation syndrome, which can be triggered by any of the processes, including infection. You have a CAR T cell therapy. You have influenza. You have swine flu, SARS, MERS. And you can see that various papers have talked about these various cytokines, and they all seem to overlap. They all seem to overlap with each other. And they seem to have a variety of patterns that these are the cytokines which usually release. And if you look further, deep dive further into it, and look at some of the cytokines which are released when you have different clinical conditions. For example, COVID-19 ARDS, sepsis-induced ARDS, sepsis with no ARDS, out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, trauma. You will see that TNF-alpha, IL-6, IL-8 concentrations sort of vary with it. And the sepsis with ARDS seems to have the highest amount of concentrations available in terms of picogram per mil in all of these. But obviously, all of these four conditions which are mentioned there actually produce these cytokines. And that's where it is important to understand that these are not limited to one process, but they can be actually seen in infective as well as non-infective processes. And then we as doctors and clinicians have sort of worked, and scientists have worked at a variety of different interventions to see whether stimulating or suppressing a particular immune response may actually change the outcome of these patients. We've looked at inhibiting or increasing the cytokine release. We've looked at affecting cytokine response expression. We've also looked at the response of the cells to the cytokine, specifically the T cells. We've looked at cytotoxic actions. We've looked at phagocytosis. We've looked at drugs which may cause regulatory or regulation of transcription or translation of protein mediators. And we've also looked at the apoptosis model. And, one of the problems is that when we've looked at these 7 or 8 variables, we have often gone on to target a single target therapy. And the single target therapy is where probably we are not able to put the finger on or the pulse on to what is actually the problem. So you have sometimes targeted endotoxins, you have targeted endocrinopathy, sometimes the DIC aspect of it, and you've got various drugs which we have studied, from activated protein C, methylprednisolone, polymyxin B for endotoxins, antithrombin. And I'm just talking about the common ones which we have used. And then there are, of course, anti-CD14, which we really don't have the strategy available right now in India, and so on and so forth. Then you've got, other cytokines like nitric oxide, NMMA. You've got oxidative stress, which we have looked at statins. We have looked at apoptosis as caspase inhibitors. So a number of therapies have been talked about since the last 25 years, which may actually improve our sepsis outcome, but none of them seem to target more than one receptor. And that's where we need to understand that maybe we were just trying at one thing, thinking that this may actually alter the outcome, but probably it was too naive to think in that way. So multi-target approach was probably thought of. And then we had therapies which possibly could sort of bring across a multi-target approach, and blocking the pathway to prove a counterproductive in treating sepsis was evident by understanding that just one pathway blocking was not going to help. And that's when the multi-target approach came through. So let's see some of these drugs which we have and some of these processes which we have utilized. Activated proteins, I'm not going to talk too much about it. Initial studies, the PROVESS and the ENHANCE trial. However, the PROVESS shock was stopped, and we know enough about it that this drug is actually gone out of circulation now, and we don't use it because of the lack of evidence. Steroids seem to be the most promising one of the lot. However, the current recommendations as they stand is to give 200 milligrams of hydrocortisone in divided doses or an infusion. Unfortunately, despite the poor evidence for it and contradictory evidence for it, it seems to be the widely used immunomodulator. And if you really ask me as a doctor, I think immunomodulatory role is questionable. I think we are using all replacement dose because the dose used is so low that it probably does not have any immunomodulatory effect. It probably just has a replacement effect. So the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which gets blunted out in sepsis, and we are still probably going to the old thinking that maybe there is a bit of a steroid deficiency, so you give this replacement dose of hydrocortisone. So what did the guidelines say? The 2017 Surviving Sepsis Guidelines suggested against using hydrocortisone to treat septic shock if the patient is adequately fully resuscitated, vasopressin therapy are able to restore hemodynamic stability. However, if this is not achieved, then they have suggested a 200 milligram dose. So the first recommendation is actually don't use it. If you're able to just resuscitate the patient with fluids and vasopressors, by all means, just avoid steroids. But if you're not able to achieve this, that means you need to first resuscitate the patient adequately. And despite an adequate resuscitation, I'm not going to go into the details of how to resuscitate them. This is not the topic of the day. Then you can think of hydrocortisone to be given. One of the latest trial, the adrenal trial by Bala Venkatesh, which was hydrocortisone versus placebo in patients who were having sepsis, failed to show any benefit in the hydrocortisone group. Again, as an antioxidant, statins were the next one, which sort of had some amount of promise in it. It was supposed to modulate apoptosis and cell proliferation. It was talked that this is the most potent immunomodulatory effect. And it also had some effect on the coagulation, which we all talk about. However, 3 RCTs were negative and were stopped due to futility. The SAILS, the StatCope, the Statin VAP, and the Anzac statins 2013, which were all possibly sort of recruited. However, there was no benefit which was seen in patients who were recruited in these arms for in terms of sepsis. There was improved mortality on those patients who already had statin on board. So if you were on statin already, then you probably had a little better outcome. Then came the whole new can of worms, which was renal replacement therapy to be used as a blood purification therapy. And there was a lot of talk and hue and cry that we may be having extracorporeal blood purification therapy as immunomodulated therapy. So one of them is obviously the intermittent therapeutic plasma exchange. And then you had these extracorporeal therapies like continuous therapies, where high volume filtration, ultra high volume filtration, pulsed high volume filtration, coupled plasma filtration and absorption were used. The hypothesis is that you need to basically target the peak concentration hypothesis. You try and remove the cytokines from the blood compartment during the pro-inflammatory phase of sepsis and assume that these levels have fallen down. Now we have point of care testing. We can actually objectively look at that. And once we have this free cytokine levels being reduced, then probably your damage to the tissues and organs may be less. And hence these therapies came into the vogue. But very little was known as to what was happening into the interstitial and the cytokine levels. We were only looking at the free circulating levels of cytokine. But what was happening at the cellular level with these cytokines was not known. And this was way back in 2003 by Ronco and Balimo, who talked about these freely circulating IL-6. And I also feel the same applies in COVID-19 as well, that we actually look at this IL-6 level and try to make a clinical decision by a free circulating IL-6, but we don't know what's happening at the tissue level and the interstitial level. And this is just a diagrammatic from the same frame authors talk about SIRS and CARS, which I think we all know. I'm just going to skip up to the next one. So when that failed to achieve good amount of response, they sort of said that, look, let's put up some filters which may be able to absorb these therapies. So rather than filtering them out, let's have some conversion and absorption in our therapy. And that would be essentially targeting larger molecules which have molecular weight of 8 kilodaltons to 51 kilodaltons. And the two boundaries were taken up because IL-8 is around 8 kilodaltons and TNF alpha is around 51 kilodaltons. So they've used conventional membrane pores to use that. And we had these high cutoff hemofilters. We had an ability to superiorly decrease the IL-6 levels. But I think, again, the same process was there, that you were actually removing inflammatory cytokines and endotoxins by veno-venous replacement therapies. And this is in burn patients, this is in therapy for patients who had burns. And we all demonstrated that the levels did fall down after the therapy. However, there was no effect on the mortality. It actually did not make any difference in the mortality. And this is 11 randomized controlled trials where CVVH eliminated inflammatory mediated cytokines in plasma effectively, shortened hospitalized stay and better stability of hemodynamics, but not anything on the mortality. Similarly, the second one talks about 16 randomized controlled trials where patients were used with this hemoperfusion and plasma exchange therapies with lower mortality in patients with sepsis, but it was not statistically significant again. So what did the Cochrane say? There is insufficient evidence to recommend the use of high volume hemofiltration in critically ill patients with sepsis and septic shock. We had this. This is a UFAST trial, which is an old trial. I'm not going to again spend too much of time. But polymyxin B as an endotoxin removal and a toxin removal filter was used, and it sort of showed that you had a better blood pressure and your SOFA scores improved, but also actually demonstrated that there was a improvement in the mortality. So I think that's when a variety of cytokine absorbing filters came across, and we had this huge and enormous surface areas where the surface area was around 8,500 meters square as compared to the classical CRRT membrane, which have got only 1.5 meter square surface area. And they all seem to be promising because they were all bringing down the cytokine responses, but we still did not know which one would be the best for our patient. And while there were a number of case series which were published, which were showing positive responses, none of the randomized controlled trials actually had a very good understanding of the blood purification techniques on mortality. So again, the surviving sepsis guidelines said that the blood purification technique, no recommendations were made on that by the 2017 surviving sepsis guidelines. Immunoglobulins. So in fact, there was a weak recommendation with low quality of evidence where they said that you avoid use of immunoglobulins. So there was against negative recommendation for immunoglobulins. There was no two studies between the two editions of surviving sepsis guidelines. Then came up the magic therapies of these immunotherapy drugs which have been used. So glutamine was one of them. And this was long back, 2015, 6 years ago. They talked about enteral glutamine substitutes. And when they looked at it, there was a slight tilt in favor of glutamine. Enteral glutamine, I must say. And the hospital mortality did seem to change, but the numbers which you were looking at was only 507 out of a control of 515. So too small a number in so many different studies, and some of the studies actually had 4 to these kind of patients, a total of 20, 27 patients. And events which were there were very, very small as well. So I think it's too early to sort of say that it makes a difference. In the subset with the burns, it probably had the biggest difference. So I think burns, it probably makes sense to use it. But again, the total number of patients were 56 and 59 in control versus the enteral glutamine group. Now we come up to the potential immunomodulatory therapies which may be used for treatment of severe sepsis, which are now new. And you have the GM-CSF, GCSF, we have thymosin, we have CTLA-4 specific antibody, and then we have the Sepsivac. So it's a potent toll-like receptor 2 agonist and a poly-toll-like receptor 2 antagonist, which basically makes it targeting multiple targets than one target. And this is the mechanism which I was saying, that this sort of targeting multiple targets than just one target, it probably then leads to a immune dysregulation being controlled much better than just one target being affected. There was this trial which was talked about, a MIST study, which was published in the Chest Journal. It was a randomized double-blind two parallel arm comparative control study looking at the efficacy of Hepsivac in combination with standard therapy. And the primary outcome was 28-day all-cause mortality. The secondary outcomes were SOFA scores, ventilator-free days, and time to vasopressin withdrawal. And lo and behold, there was a significant reduction in mortality in patients with severe presumed gram-negative sepsis. And number needed to treat was 9, which seemed to be extremely good and sometimes too good to be true, actually. And if you look at this absolute mortality, the placebo group was around 19.98% versus 8.9% the Hepsivac group. And, I did not understand this data which they actually published, which said that median time to death, death is a death. How does it matter whether the placebo had a shorter death and the Hepsivac had a longer death? I think it was a bit confounding to sort of look at that kind of a data and say that you died, but you died 4 days later. Just doesn't make any sense to me. Then there is this thymosin alpha, which is another molecule. It is a protein. It is sort of a T cell precursor. So it's been sort of resurgent again in COVID-19 because we know that the T cell dysfunction happens. And the mechanism of action is essentially it stimulates these effect on the antibodies, where interferon 2, IL-6, and so on and so forth. And it sort of has a direct inhibiting effect on the infected or the tumor cells. So it's been used in cancer therapy as well. And it looks like your T cell response improves, your lymphocytes start increasing when you use this drug. However, large trials need to be done before anything can be said about that. So in summary, guys, immunomodulatory therapy in sepsis has not shown a very clear benefit. I'll be very honest with you. A lot of promise, but only 1 or 2 studies which have shown change in mortality. Perhaps glutamine in burns and a little bit of therapy, which now in COVID-19 have come across. But again, that's not purely sepsis. We are not talking about viral sepsis as such. And abdominal sepsis, where endotoxin removal by polymyxin B has got some favorable effects. I think some of the other therapies just need to be looked very, very closely before we come up to any conclusion. Thank you very much. And I would like to stop here. And I just took my 20 minutes. I hope I did not cross my time too much.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. It was very spot on lecture about role of immunomodulation in sepsis with the current evidence and current guidelines of surviving sepsis campaign also. Here would like to invite our panelists also. We have Dr. Anand Nikalji sir with us. Just share my screen. Yeah, so I'll introduce panel. We have with Dr. Anand Nikalji sir. Presently, he is a director at MCRI ICU MGM Medical College, Aurangabad. He is associate professor, Department of Medicine, MGM Medical College Hospital, Aurangabad. Vast experience in the field of critical care, and presently just been elected as Vice President for Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine. He is lead author in Update in Critical Care 2017 and various publications. We have with us Dr. Nirmal Jaiswal sir also. Welcome you, sir. He's a critical care consultant and ICU director at Nagpur. He's also a teacher for fellowship of Indian College of Critical Care Medicine. He's a national faculty. He was the president of Indian Academy of Medical Sciences. He was a past president of ICSM Nagpur branch, past president of Diabetic Association of India, past president of Cardiological Society of India, Vidarbha chapter. Welcome you, sir. We have with us Dr. Pankaj Palange also. She's head of Department of General Medicine at Bharati Vidyapeeth Medical College, Sangli. Also experience for more than 20 years. She had various publications under her belt also, and very much interested in the field of critical care and active participant and in management of critical care patients in Bharati Vidyapeeth Medical College, Sangli. We have with us Dr. Sujit Kadam. Again, he is a consultant intensivist at Nashik. and his passion is involved into a number of publications and trials in the field of critical care. So welcome Dr. Sujit also. We have with us Dr. Nijamuddin Kotwal. Again, is a consultant physician intensivist at Solapur, very actively involved in Mahacriticon 2017, and he is the secretary of Solapur API at present also. He is also actively involved in management of critically ill patients in ICU. And last, we have with us Dr. Alok Narde. He's from Karad. He's also working in the field of critical care, and his passion is practicing ecos, and he's running his private ICU in Sangli district at Karad and Beta. So welcome you all for this. Stop sharing. I welcome you on behalf of Cadila for this session. Here, I would like to go ahead with the first question to Dr. Anand Nikalji, sir. Sir is here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm audible?
Yes, sir. Sir, I would like to know about, as Rahul sir has said, that in sepsis we get a vast variety of patients and we have to stratify them under some tool or by using some tool. So what scoring system you prefer to use? Is it SOPA or is it Apache, and how frequently you use it in your ICU, and how useful it is in your clinical practice?
Yeah, actually, scoring system is very important to actually quantify your quality of care in the ICU and probably prediction of mortality. I think this question is quite interesting and quite difficult to answer because all scoring system has got some advantages and some problems. But as far as the two major scoring system concern, Apache, which is now Apache 4, and SOFAScore, I would just like to mention that Apache has slightly better age for predicting mortality in critical ill patient and probably a mixed population of the patient. But the problem of Apache is that it is very cumbersome. Very list of long variables has to be included for Apache scoring. So SOFAScore, which is slightly better to daily monitor or frequently monitor. So I think SOFAScore is slightly better to use in day-to-day ICU work.
I would like to hear from Rahul sir also about his views about scoring system.
Yes.
I think scoring systems are good. Scoring systems are very, very important. You need to have them in your armamentarium to sort of understand which patients can be categorized as patients who require higher attention. I think that's the most important thing. So it sort of gives you a number. You know, it's fine to be an accomplished intensivist or a physician and be able to have a pulse on everything. But when you're in a learning process, if you tell somebody, one of your teacher students, that look, this patient has got a very high Apache score based on these different variables, they seem to understand better that, look, I have to look at a patient who has got multi-systemic problem. And then that helps you into categorizing it. It also helps you to benchmark your own work with the work of other people. Otherwise, how are you going to benchmark it? How will you say that my work is better than the other work? Or let's not say compare. How am I going to increase my bar? You have to have some benchmark to increase your own bar. You cannot just be stagnated at one point. So to increase your bar, you require some amount of scoring system. Scoring systems are for us as doctors to improve upon ourselves. That's how I look at scoring systems. It tells us which patient is critical, who requires extra care, and how am I going to improve myself to give better care to this patient. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I think very important comment from Dr. Rahul Pandit. Sir, again, what is your experience about the Apache versus SOFAScore?
Look, I think there are two different uses that we actually do, the SOFA and Apache. Apache is more, which basically talks about the predicted mortality, which you rightly said has got a little bit of an edge over the other ones. But SOFA has its own characteristics, which are very relevant to ICU. And that's why I think they are both important. We cannot be comparing one against other. I think they both have a little bit of understanding, because so far Apache tells you within the first 24 hours which patients have got a high chance of dying. Whereas so far tells you little parameters, intrinsic parameters about intensive care, which are very important for us.
I wanted to add that if you want some interventions, like in patients of sepsis where we have a very high mortality, so how we are going to intervene with knowing the scoring or Apache score? So we can compare two arms. One arm which is we give a standard care, and one arm if we give us some drug. So we can compare in two Apache score or two SOFA score how the difference of mortality, ICU length of stay or ventilator length of stay. So for comparing study research work, as Sir has said, as you are benchmarking and improving your quality of care and predicting mortality, this scoring system is very important. I think both scores are very good, but it is mandatory to use it daily with understanding of their limitation, advantages, and probably cost and manpower involved in it.
Thank you, sir. My next question will be to Nirmal Jaiswal, sir. We have heard a lot. We have talked about a lot of immunomodulators. So there is a common question from the audience also. Then if nothing is effective, then what is to be used? And what is your experiences of these immunomodulators and what are currently available at your unit and your experiences with these immunomodulators?
Yeah, hi Kapil. Hi Rahul. Hi Anand.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, sir. Hi.
Basically, Dr. Rahul has very nicely narrated what is exactly available today and what are the experiences through the clinical trials. See, you should understand what we have today for the sepsis. We have got a focus of sepsis. This is one. And you are supposed to treat that focus of sepsis. That is the mainstay of the therapy, right? But at the same time, what his lecture has shown you that path, even if you do so many things for that focus of sepsis, we don't reduce that mortality, right? That is the basic like hallmark of our, unfortunately, I can say, hurdles of saving the life of the people. So what is new things are happening? That is the one thing is there for the critical care people across the world. Okay, what we should look into it. So we should look into the basically pathophysiology of the disease, pathophysiology of the sepsis, whatever the disease can be. So what is the pathophysiology of the sepsis? Is definitely a pro-inflammatory marker, a pro-inflammatory stage, or maybe the anti-inflammatory stage, both. So which are the things which has been in early 1990s, it has been widely been studied, which markers, which immunomodulators or immunosuppressants, which is going to help in reducing the mortality. Unfortunately, till today, nothing has scored over the whatever the antibiotics and the basic ICU fantastic care which is available in our ICU, right? The score system, I agree with Dr. Anand also at the same time. Definitely it saves and definitely it will more motivate you, or maybe taking the more judgment as far as the reducing the like mortality as such or morbidity as such in few number of patients. By this way, some ICU people gets the good score over the mortality, or some people may not. But at this point of view, like being a critical care consultant, you are supposed to like tilt towards that what is available new in the market, like protein C inhibitors. Like we definitely used quite widely. I think you must have, Kapil must have used during those time. It was very surprising that trials has come negative, but some people are really gone home. I think everybody agrees on the platform. They are really gone home. But unfortunately, we are supposed to go with the evidence-based trial, and the drug definitely has gone out of the market from the world itself. So what is available today, which will not see poly-targeted therapy? One single target will not help, because sepsis is equal to have so many cytokines in the body, and all cytokines causes the multi-organ failure. So if you have the LPS, then you will start targeting only one. If you have got a TNF alpha, you have got to only target one. So if you have the basket, which is quite what you call it as dependable, then you can have the one or two or three immunomodulators or immunosuppressant to be used in the same patient. But definitely cost makes a hell of a difference in our setup of developing country. But what is available today is a Sepsivac. That is definitely which has definitely is prepared from the heat-killed mycobacterium. So side effects of that particular molecule is not there. That is only which crux in our mind. And during the COVID time, which it has been focused, all the people here has faced that gram-negative sepsis in our ICU setup when the people have treated the COVID-19 infection because of the maybe comorbidity, diabetes mellitus, which was uncontrolled, or maybe the use of the steroid that time. And I have found that definitely has reduced my mortality. I don't have the evidence base, but definitely it has reduced because we wanted to use something new because nothing was working in Corona. Nothing was working in Corona. And as Dr. Rahul has already said, virus sepsis is different and the bacterial sepsis is different. But definitely the cytokine storm was there. Even in my unit, we have used the cytokine cytoSOF filters because in first wave, we were not having anything in our hand. So logic, reduce the inflammation, inflammatory marker, or maybe the cytokines from the body so that we can tide over that particular crisis for another 2-3 days. But unfortunately, all the patients have died, unfortunately. But Sepsivac, I have used not on day one, but definitely on the 10th or 15th day when the patient again started going for the what you call it as high counts, high CRP again, which was gone down, and the patient was having the blood cultures positive. Definitely, it has shown a very, very good response. I can just count the numbers and count. I can say the patient's name who has gone home when the patient had landed the second time in the sepsis. I can answer that question. When nothing is available, why we should are here on the platform today? But we intensivists have the armamentarium. We are supposed to save the life of the patient. Why not to use which is doesn't have any toxicity in the body? So we can use those drugs which are available at this point of time. Now, if you see the vitamin C, once upon a time, almost a year back, it was a quite hype. It is going to reduce the mortality in such. Even the thiamine, even the hydrocortisone, what the Dr. Rahul has also said. But it has the number of RCTs has shown the vitamin C, vitamin thiamine, it doesn't have any reduction in the mortality at all. So that has been also been gone.
I think sir has ignited a very important question here. When in a desperate situation, should we use some drug which is still in pipeline and not has much of evidence but no side effects? So I would like to hear from each of you for panelists about what Dr. Nirmal sir has raised this question, and I would like to hear from Rahul sir also about his views about in desperate situations. And we had many relatives coming to us also with n number of list of drugs. So how you tackled it and how you like to address this, Rahul sir?
I thought I would be the last one to speak on this. Anyway, I think look, what Dr. Nirmal is saying is not untrue. Okay, when you are pushed against the wall, you have to think of options which may be there and not cause any harm to the patient. Now, do we know enough about it? Do we know enough that harm is there or not there? In the same breath, let's take the example of tocilizumab. Okay, it's a classic example in COVID-19. In the first wave, I am a tocilizumab recipient myself. Okay, I was given tocilizumab on 8th or 9th of May last year. Had a bad COVID. I was an HFNC. And I personally feel, just reflecting back on it, before tocilizumab was started, I actually had started to improve. But the credit went to tocilizumab because tocilizumab was given next time oxygen requirement came down. That's fine. So subsequent to that, 67, 68 patients we used, and we found that sepsis was very high in that group. So since then, I've stopped using tocilizumab, not used even once. Now comes the recovery trial data about tocilizumab, which is a positive trial now. Okay. So probably we were not using it correctly. We need to use when all the 4 or 5 parameters are ticked, which is use it within the first 24 to 48 hours of worsening of into the intensive care. Use it when you've tried steroids, still it is not working. Use it when your IL-6, CRP or both are increasing. Use it when you have ruled out sepsis, specifically bacterial and fungal sepsis and tuberculosis sepsis in India, which is very right, but difficult to rule out. When you have all of these boxes ticked right, you probably need to use it. And if you use it correctly, you use it in one single dose, you will probably not have a problem. I have seen patients being used 2 times, 3 times tocilizumab. Every third day they were getting a tocilizumab, and all varieties of practice has been done. So I think this is the problem with the repurposed drugs, that we don't know it's used and we tend to then overuse or you underuse. So just like what I am giving you my example, I have not used tocilizumab, but today after the recovery data, I'm more open to it. That if I have to use it, if I get a patient and if I tick all these 5 boxes, I will use it. I have no issues in that. So that's where we need to understand that when you're pushed against the wall, you try a variety of things. But as the data emerges, you should be ready to change your practice. You should be ready to either abandon it or adopt it. So it's very important to have a good data coming across. And that's where we need to look at the clinical trials. Now, in a pandemic situation, the situation is very dynamic. Your protocol is a live document. It's not a document which can be set in stone and said that follow this for the whole year. Because every single day, there are thousands of publications which are coming out. And you will have 1 or 2 good publications, which will be practice-changing publications. Whether it is to do with the therapy, whether it is to do with the drugs, or whether it is to do with the procedure or something like, say, for example, prone. I'm just giving an example. Proning these patients, awake proning these patients. So we've all adopted those therapies which have been harmless. So why not adopt therapies in drugs and formularies which are harmless and which are within the realms of clinical trial, proven to be effective in some other condition, but more importantly, proven that they don't cause any side effects. So if you can use that and then wait for the publication to come and don't abuse it. We may not be knowing the right drug, but right dose, but that doesn't mean that the dose approved for a particular other disease, you sort of try and use 6 times the higher dose or 3 times the higher dose and say that I want to use it in sepsis to see if I can immunomodulate it. It's not the right thing. So a balance has to be struck, and as soon as you have some evidence for it, you need to adopt to that evidence and understand to either stop using it if the evidence says so, or to completely embrace it and say that this is going to be my now my practice until I have a better evidence coming into for my treatment. So that's what we need to look at.
I would like to hear from Dr. Palange, Dr. Kotwal, and Dr. Sujit Kadam also, and Dr. Alok also, very quickly about the same thing.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Palange. Thank you very much for calling me for this nice session. And it is always nice to hear Dr. Rahul Pandit. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, everyone is talking about immunomodulators in sepsis. And what we are observing since last many years, that many drugs are coming and gaining some importance, and then they are losing the importance after a few days, after trials. Then we see that there are no mortality benefits with this drug. So initially we used the drugs like activated protein C used to gain so much of importance in sepsis, and then it lost its effect. So many drugs, like sir said, now tocilizumab. Even I'm treating too many COVID patients now, and I'm using tocilizumab with better results. Apart from, if we see other drugs, but tocilizumab is a drug which has made its place till now, and there are good results. Now there are so many other drugs which are also used. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. So if we see for steroids, so steroids are the one drugs which are constantly used since so many years. So what I say, it's a wonder drug, even though there is a controversy about the use of steroids in sepsis. But if we see, it is a drug which is used in a stressful condition, and every time it is the drug of choice. So many times we say that this steroids, they are not useful, or if we use, we are increasing the infection. But still, it is a drug which is constantly used in practice, and which is previously in COVID also it was said ki don't use steroids, but then the report come that it is a game changer and there are mortality benefits with steroids only. So what we are seeing, that steroids is still a drug which is used in sepsis unchangeably with antibiotics. So what we have to give, we have to give antibiotic trials. In lecture, sir said ki whatever steroid dose we are using, so it is a less dose. We are not using it in adequate amount. So what I feel, if we are using the steroid, so which steroids to be used? So that is the question. Which steroid it is which is a preferable steroid? So here what I would like to say, in case of acute sepsis, short-acting steroid like methylprednisolone, if it is used in a adequate dose, like what we are using is 125 milligram to 250 milligram 6 hourly. Many times we are giving steroid pulse also. Even dexamethasone given in a pulse therapy. It is life-saving drug. In COVID also, we are using steroids, even the dose is less. And as Sir said, it is not used as an immunomodulator, but it is having anti-inflammatory effect, and it might be decreasing all the inflammatory mediators. So to a bit, and it is a co-drug with all the other drugs like antibiotics, other immunomodulators. So steroid is a drug which is constantly used even in practice, even though we are seeing that some side effects are there, like they can increase the whatever infection is there, or superadded infections are also seen in the ICU. But we have to take care of all these infections with better hygienic practice, with the adequate use of immunomodulatory therapies, other immunomodulators, and the antibiotics. So judicious use of steroid is still recommended. I want to ask Rahul sir about his experience of steroids in sepsis and in ICU and even in COVID also.
So, Dr. Palangi, I think it is quite clear the role of steroids in sepsis, in COVID-19, beg your pardon. So, the trial after trial have shown that low dose steroids which we have to use, and the drug of choice is dexamethasone, or you follow the MAP protocol and use methylprednisolone, and the dose cannot be more than equivalent of 6 to 8 milligrams of dexamethasone per day, or 40 milligrams of methylprednisolone per day. For a day or so, you can give up to 2 milligrams, 1.5 to 2 milligrams per kilogram of methylprednisolone if you need to, but you need to bring down the dose very rapidly. Similarly, for sepsis, I think the high dose or the 125 TDS or BD dose, which you mentioned, have been really not practiced anymore. It is all about a replacement dose of steroid which is used. And there have been a number of trials, and the high dose of steroids has really gone away, out of vogue. What we really look at is this low dose replacement dose of steroid, that too in a very small subset of patients in whom the resuscitation, despite resuscitation, they remain hypotensive. And I think steroid is actually the true double-edged sword, if you can call any drug in the intensive care unit practice. It is steroid. It is truly a double-edged sword. If you use it, you are damned. If you don't use it, you are damned as well. So it's a problem that if you decide to abandon steroid from your practice, you will always find one reason every day to use it. And if you start using it in every patient because you think that sepsis basically helps in steroid, you will be then getting it wrong in at least majority of the patients. So we need to have that balance. And I think right now the evidence is very clear. The guidelines are very clear that let's use in this small subset of patients who have good resuscitation but remain hypotensive. And obviously the immunomodulatory dose is not there. For sepsis, it's just not there. There's enough evidence for that right now.
So this will again raise to a new question what sir has said, when to use such drugs or immunomodulation. I would like to ask Dr. Nijamuddin Kotwal about this. What is the ideal time, if at all, I have to use some immunomodulators? What is the ideal time, and what are the markers that will guide you to use such drugs, or whether it will be more of a clinical decision?
I think it should be a combined decision with the inflammatory markers and a clinical judgment at the onset of an organ dysfunction. I myself have been a recipient of a tocilizumab last year in the first wave. And in this wave, I have used around 50 plus patients in Sepsivac. So if you use it as an earlier, at the onset of any organ dysfunction, I think the results are good. Even for tocilizumab, single dose at the earliest, at an evidence of when the steroids are failing and the saturation is not improving, oxygenation is failing, I think it should be used as an earliest.
Okay, so as per Dr. Kotwal, it has to be used more of a clinical decision rather than relying on IL-6, CRPs, or any other inflammatory markers. It has to be more of a clinical judgment when you are going to use your immunomodulators. I would like to ask Dr. Sujit Kadam about his experiences of immunomodulators and his experiences with Sepsivac also, as a, if at all he has used as an immunomodulator. You are not audible. You have to unmute yourself.
Good evening, everybody. Myself, Dr. Sujit Kadam. Regarding Sepsivac, which we are using it since last many years or many months. But the real name came into picture in the last year, like first wave, and the number of patient pandemic and so many number of patients. So we got a real testing of the drug. So in first wave, I personally used a huge number of this Sepsivac drug, and last year we used it as a intradermal dose. And the limitations we faced in the last year, that basically the appropriate use, like the technique regarding giving the intradermal doses by the inadequate number of the staff, and facing the problems with the giving the actual how to give the technique in using the injections. And we have faced some trouble in injecting the drug and having some ulcers and abscesses from the patient side, complaints from the patients. But regarding the usefulness of the drug, like there is a huge difference in the results, like the patients where we haven't used this drug and the patients in we use this drug, there's a huge difference in response of the patient. So where we use the Sepsivac, there is a means this patient didn't land up into the some like this cytokine storms and all this. We are using this drug in an early situation, means whenever the patient is coming early, we are giving these immunomodulators in a early situation, and we are getting very good results. And this wave, second wave, ultimately we have used in a huge number of patients, wherever the patients are willing, and we are using the drug, and we have got a huge and very good response in the second wave also. So probably might be I have
used like
more,
to interrupt you, because you have said you have used it in both the waves. I think everybody and audience will also be like to know when did you decide to give that drug, and what were there any parameters, and approximately how much is the number you have?
Number regarding means I have crossed around like 500 patients till date, maybe, because I'm not remembering the number. It might be more, but approximately more than 500 cases till date. Sepsivac. But we have tried in both ways, like intradermal injections in last wave and this wave also. But sometimes I have discussed with some company experts also, and we have tested the drug like intravenous injections also. So that is somehow off label, but we have tested that, and that are also working very nicely and giving very good results. So we have started this drug as the patients actually in my practice, in my scenario, we are holding a tertiary care. So the patients are coming somehow late, means they are landed up with the somehow early RDS, or they are having some CT scores of something like around 10 or more than 10. And these patients are coming that, and like the oxygen saturations are less than 95. So patients, many means almost 99% of patients are coming in that situation, and we are facing the huge stress and trouble in treating these patients. And the same time we are counseling the patient, and we are initiating this drug. And I specifically like to tell the audience that in second wave, everybody knows that there is a huge shortage of the drugs like remdesivir and all this tocilizumab. So in second wave, we haven't used means like not a single dose of remdesivir we haven't used, not a single dose of tocilizumab we haven't used. We have done, means all the patients we have straight away gone with the Sepsivac, and almost the mortality, means if we count, there is almost a zero mortality. Almost, means I don't know, somehow a single patient might be in a single digit, might be some patients are skipped from our follow-up, But whatever the patients are in our follow-up, we haven't lose any patient in this second wave.
Actually, we would like to get a lot of data from you. I think
Yeah.
can help you, because what you are quoting is a huge thing.
Yeah, we are maintaining the data, and I have submitted lots of data.
I'd like to ask Dr. Alok, today's one more panelist from Karad. I would like to ask why we are so much worried, using immunomodulators. What are its limitations? And what are the challenges? Why we are so much worried and we are not directly or straightly using immunomodulators?
Yes, there are certain limitations to its use. Most importantly, what I feel is pregnancy. There is no much data that is available, so we cannot straight away use it for pregnant patients. And also patients who are on concurrent immunosuppressive therapy for some other diseases, we cannot use it in them because already they are immunosuppressed, and we are going to use this as an immunomodulator or in a gram-negative septicemia scenario. So we cannot use it in these situations. Very elderly age group patients also somehow we are little having restricted use. So we are not using it. A lot of patients nowadays also come up with questions like whether this is a recommended drug or whether it is going to serve the benefit. So the recommendation is lacking for this. Even from the task force, the recommendation is lacking. So some people even question that. So getting a consent from patients sometimes becomes a limitation. And sometimes the route of administration that earlier we used to have, like intradermal route. So it was having a limitation, like it used to cause a scar or a keloid, or it used to form an abscess at the site of injection. So what we have done is recently in the second wave is we have started using it in an intravenous route. So we give 0.3 milligrams intravenously diluted in 100 ml of normal saline. So it has generally proved to be of a better efficacy, and the injection site related problems are also solved with this particular scenario. And one more limitation for its use I have also noticed is there is some flare up of fungal infections. So if we suspect some specific skin related fungal infections, then we generally avoid use of this particular drug. Otherwise, it is quite safe to use and without much of it is not strictly contraindicated in a particular case.
Now, very quick words starting from Dr. Anand sir and then Dr. Nirmal and then all. In one line, what will be the message given to the audience about use of immunomodulators? I'm not talking about COVID, I'm talking about sepsis. What will be the one-liner message to the audience? Anand sir.
Yes. Till date, there is no strong evidence to use immunomodulators in sepsis patients. Steroid in only shock, when your vasopressors are not improving your blood pressure, you can use in 200 milligram per day dose. So please don't use it in all patients of sepsis. Till date, there is no clear positive recommendation about any immunomodulator. That is my one-line message.
Nirmal sir.
Can I?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, a little bit difference with Anand, basically. What there's something like what exactly we were talking. If we don't have anything and we doesn't have any side effect, right? Till the trial comes, I think we are ready to use it. That's an open mind, right? This is one. Another, I cannot forget, the COVID had taught me even the injectable methylene blue, even the what you call it as nebulization methylene blue, even the and the IV form for 5 days of N-acetylcysteine with a full dose of 35 ml per day. But what is important is timing is the most important. As such, if you see the lot of trials, N-acetylcysteine has worsened the patient, right? That's the reason it is out of the scenario of our evidence-based practice. But if we use it, this COVID has really taught us which drugs are good for a lot of patients. So there are some patients who are on Sepsivac. There are some patients who are on methylene blue. There are some patients on combination of all three, all mode 2. But it has given a good results. Definitely it has. Even the TOSI in WOCAD, we have got almost like 225 patients And out of that, only the 211 patients have gone home. Right time use is the most important thing in TOSI also, because it also has, Dr. Rahul has also said, it has itself has a lot of side effects, and then the patient doesn't come out. There was a time, am I right, Rahul, Dr. Rahul?
Yes, sir. Everything is about timing. Every single drug which you use is about timing, whether it is an immunomodulator or even an antibiotic. If you delay the antibiotic, you are in problem. If you give it early, you would develop resistance. So you have to target. Everything has got a timing, and if you miss the timing, it's essentially you are not doing a favor to the patient. Then you are actually causing more harm to the patient. You are not giving any benefit to the patient.
Dr. Ballange.
Yes, I agree with Dr. Jaiswal and Dr. Rahul Pandit. Earlier is better. As soon as you suspect that sepsis is there and it is controllable, at that time only you have to give this drug. About Sepsivec, I have also used Sepsivec in COVID as well as non-COVID sepsis. Until date, I have whatever information I relieved from my own judgment. It is a good drug, but if it is given at timely situation, if it is given very late in like bad ARDS and bad sepsis patient, then no drug is useful. So as Dr. Jaiswal said and Dr. Rahul Pandit said, so time is machine. Like you have to use your judgment and use it as early as possible.
Dr. Kotwal?
Yes, sir, I agree with all of them. At the earliest, at right time, then it is effective. Otherwise, it won't be effective. Let it be all.
Yes. Timing is the most important factor in this all the situations, and you have to be very alert while using all these things. If you are using late, then the wastage of money also and wastage of the resources also.
So, Kapil, I would like to say I have not used this drug at all. And whatever drug I use, I would use it in a setting of research right now, specifically for sepsis. Okay. And for COVID-19, because there is only so much little known about so many things in terms of COVID-19, I would have been prepared to use it outside the settings of research as well if there was no harm seen, as Dr. Jaiswal said. But for sepsis, I would not use any of these drugs. I completely concur with Anand, because there is enough research on sepsis to say that we should not be using any of these drugs. But COVID-19 treatment, it's a different thing. Though the mechanism would be still cytokine blunting, it would still be difficult to justify the use in sepsis right now.
Sir, I would like
Can I add, Kapil, short? Actually, my experience about the COVID and even previous COVID without COVID patients, we have lost patients because of the secondary bacterial and fungal infection in the ICU. So please remember, prevention of infection in the ICU has scored more than any drug in the ICU, any immunomodulator. That is one thing. Then steroid useful in COVID patient only who requires oxygen and only for 10 days with 6 milligram of dexamethasone or 40 milligram of methylprednisolone. So just don't forget a basic and a very standard critical care which has got more outcome than this kind of drug. That is one thing. And I think we should follow Surviving Sepsis Campaign guidelines, even for COVID and for sepsis patient. I think it covered all practical points of managing sepsis. So it may be a fluid restriction, it may be a vasopressor, it may be a nutrition, it may be a drugs, antibiotics, everything are comprehensively covered with sepsis guidelines, and I usually follow these guidelines in my practice, and I'm getting good results. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I would like to sum up that what Rahul sir has nicely summarized in the talk about the evidence till date. We have gone through about our panelists also who have actually used Sepsivac in their practice with some benefits. We have with Dr. Kadam also, who has used more than 500 patients, and his experience is very positive. I have also used in around more than 75 patients, and our paper, our publication is in pipeline. We are statistically working on that. Our results will be out by next month, so probably we will have more evidence. And we are thinking about this drug only after a paper, which is a trial published or trial done in PGI, which is published in Indian Lung Journal, which had a positive outcome. So here I would like to sum up with saying with today, as Dr. Rahul said, if you go by evidence for use of Sepsivac, we need a lot more data and a lot more evidence to use this drug, particularly in sepsis. And I hope that whatever sir has said or whatever we have discussed here is all evidence-based, and to be truthful to the audience and to give a very clear message, as Dr. Anand has also said, for today, timing is very important and the drug is important. And we do agree with what Dr. Nirmal sir has said. In the situations where we have to save the patient and we are stuck in critical care, we end up using something, and whatever experiences we all had using Sepsivac was a positive. So hopefully we are looking in a very positive frame of mind toward this drug. And as Rahul sir has said, that requires more and more data to probably satisfy and to get into the clinical practice. And I would like to hear the last few lines of concluding remarks from Rahul sir, and then we will stop this session.
Look, I think it's a very interesting and very, very encouraging discussion here. It's good to know that people understand the limitations. All of you understand the limitations, but you're prepared to venture out of the borders of those limitations to try and help your patients, which is the pure thought behind all of this discussion. Okay. But we live in an evidence-based medicine world right now. And once we have, my only submission here is, yes, science is what, there is something called as a art of medicine, and we need to practice the art of medicine. Art of medicine is always variable. Guidelines tell you that what should be done bare minimum. Guidelines do not stop you from doing something. So if there is a clear message there that you don't use this in the guideline, then you should not try and challenge that, because that's come after a lot of evidence. Okay. But if there is no mention of anything of a particular process or a particular drug, doesn't mean that it needs to be abandoned. Okay. So we need to use that, and we need to use that in a research setting, and we need to use that and produce data and look at the data, objectively assess the data, and see whether it is applicable in your clinical practice or not, and then adopt it accordingly. If we are not going to listen to the data which is there and going to do something which is completely different, I think that's not the art of medicine. That's essentially you are actually going completely against all the rules of it. So guidelines help you to come to a standard, but challenging the guidelines and going a bit beyond to try and improve your patient within the realms of research and ethical practice, I think it's fine. What is not fine is breaking those rules and going into a practice which basically shows a harm to the patient.
Very, very thoughtful message at the end, probably eye-opener to all of us. And I think in single small paragraph, sir has summarized today's all discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rahul sir, for sparing your time. Thank you, Dr. Anand sir, Dr. Nirmal sir, Dr. Palanga madam, Dr. Sujit Kadam, Dr. Kotwal sir, and Dr. Alok. I'll hand over to Cadila people for
Kapil needs an applause because he has conducted and moderated the session very well. I really appreciate Kapil. Thank you, Kapil.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Rahul.
Very, very good, Kapil. Very well done.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, before we conclude, and my name is Amit Jain. I work as a vice president and head of this business. First of all, I pay thanks to the entire eminent authorities present over here for the excellent deliberations, right from Dr. Kapil Purwake sir for giving and moderating it well. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Rahul Pandit sir, and I must say it's one of the best deliberations, and very good. Your experience and knowledge has been shared, and along with our panelists, Dr. Anand, Dr. Nirmal, Dr. Pankaj, Dr. Nizamuddin sir, Dr. Sujit, and Dr. Alok. Sir, you rightly mentioned that any drug which has come up, I think it has to be first used, and then only we can really understand that how the drug is behaving. And I always believe that a drug has to stand on the merits. So we are also trying to create, because when we have launched this product last year, so this product has actually been developed along with CSIR, sir. It's a joint collaboration between the Government of India, CSIR, and Cadila Pharmaceuticals. And based on that, sir, we did some trials into PGI and AIMS and got some approvals into gram-negative sepsis. We're not making any tall claims. If you see, there's a clear documented that it is offering around 11% mortality benefit. But we always believe that even if it is able to save one extra life, it is actually helping when the other drugs are not there. Secondly, sir, it has been repurposed during COVID first wave, and the trials are also undergoing, and now lots of publications have also started coming up. So we are also working on generating more and more evidence. And once this localized reactions has been formed, so we have initiated an IV trial also, which is also getting completed by this month end, and probably we'll be having an outcomes by the next month itself too, onto the safety as well as the efficacy too, and probably the usage which has been extended by all the different doctors across country has actually enhanced more. I will only like to mention, sir, that this drug is not just targeting only one. It is basically having a more potential to say, and we are very open to initiate more number of studies, more number of trials, and more number of usage, so that we can create enough evidence for this molecule. And certainly like to mention also that it's one of the cost-effective therapy too. So we thank you for your usage, and we will certainly comply the guidelines as well as the suggestions. And we assure you, sir, that we will be definitely promoting in a right manner itself, sir. So thank you very much for the opportunity given to us to organize, and thank you very much to all the delegates who have joined these programs. And I must say, we are very fortunate to be amongst the celebrities from the medical world who gathered here today, and really it has enhanced the stature of this program. We are doing lots of programs, but I must say that this is one of the best programs which we have ever done, and this has really meant a lot, sir. So on behalf of Cadila Pharmaceuticals, I thanks, and I also like to congratulate my team for getting connected, getting associated, and bringing the delegates over here. So thank you very much, Dr. Kapil, sir. Thank you once again, Dr. Rahul, Dr. Sujit, Dr. Anand, Dr. Nimal, sir, Dr. Pankaj, Dr. Nizamuddin, Dr. Sujit, and Dr. Alok, sir. Thank you very much for being here and giving your deliberations. And maybe Dr. Pradeep, you like to say something, or maybe we can continue.
I think we'll wind up.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
All the faculties.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye.